Eli had never intended to attend the banquet, and the banquet had never intended to include Eli. As it happened, both intentions were ignored when the ship's environmental systems went haywire, and he was summoned to fix the temperature regulators in the upper concourse. Coincidentally, where the Irith delegation's grand reception was just beginning. He arrived in his repair jumpsuit, one sleeve singed from a minor plasma hiccup, his hair still damp from whatever that mist had been in the reactor shaft. He told himself it probably wasn't toxic. If it was, he hoped it at least gave him superpowers. That seemed like a fair trade. What he hadn't expected was to be waved through security by a 7-foot Irith guard whose expression suggested either extreme constipation or reverent dread. Either way, it was the most respect Eli had received all month. The hall was dazzling in the way only alien architecture could be, made of some shimmering mineral that looked like quartz but reacted to sound by changing hue. Someone clinked a spoon against a glass and the ceiling briefly turned fuchsia. Eli tried not to whistle just to see if it would go plaid. He was halfway to the nearest maintenance panel, crouched under a glittering sculpture that he prayed wasn't sacred, when he saw her. She didn't walk so much as drift across the floor, her robe sweeping behind her like it had personal gravity. Her skin was pale, almost opalescent under the refracted lights, and her black hair shimmered like starlight. And then there were the ears, long, tapering, not quite elven but definitely not regulation human issue. Lady Zyria of the Irith Syndicate. Eli had read about her in passing, political emissary, tactician. Once negotiated peace between two factions by threatening to destroy both and offering free wine to the survivors. Elegant, untouchable, not someone you introduced yourself to while holding a hydrospanner and smelling faintly of coolant. Which is exactly what he did. "Hi," he said, a bit louder than intended. "Your dress is stunning." A silence fell between them like a dropped piano. He could feel his ears heating up. "I mean, not that you needed a dress to look stunning. Not that you'd walk around without one, that's not. Humans don't say that, it's just fashion, good fashion, that you're wearing on your body." She blinked once slowly. Her amber eyes did something terrifying. Was that a scan? Or a pity calculation? Then, to his shock, she smiled. Not wide, just a subtle lift of her lips that felt like the ship had tilted slightly. "You are not a diplomat," she said. "Nope," Eli said, popping the P like a cork. "I'm the guy they call when the temperature control decides to simulate Venus. And you came to our feast by accident." He glanced at the hydrospanner, then at the ceremonial table behind her. A bowl of something was gently hissing. "I was lured by the scent of burning circuits and existential dread." She tilted her head, one long ear twitching with what might have been amusement. A hunter, then. Of doom and snack options, yes. That earned him a soft exhale, laughter. Irith humor, maybe. Or maybe she was just stifling a cough. He couldn't tell, but she stepped slightly closer. "I believe," she said, "you are the first to tell me such a thing." Eli squinted. "About your dress?" "Yes." "No way. You look like you walked out of a galactic opera." "Most tell me I resemble an avenging seraph." "That too, but the nice kind. The kind that might vaporize a planet but politely." Another silence, this one lighter. She looked at him a moment longer, then turned gracefully and walked past him. He let out a breath, then immediately realized she hadn't gone far. In fact, she was now standing beside a panel on the wall. "You were summoned to fix this?" she asked. "Yeah, it's been set to sweaty ambassador for 3 hours." "Allow me." She pressed a sequence on the panel. The lights dimmed, the room cooled by 3 degrees. Eli frowned. How did you?" She smiled again. "I have learned much about your systems. It amuses me to override them." "That's illegal." "Then I am merely guessing, at random with great success." He laughed, a real one. Loud enough that the nearest server bot chirped in alarm and tried to offer him a napkin. The rest of the night, he remained in the room. Not because he had more work, he didn't. But because each time he tried to leave, he'd hear her voice again, low and curious, asking about human idioms or the cultural significance of nacho cheese. At some point, someone brought him a chair. Later, someone else refilled his glass with something that turned blue when agitated. He didn't even realize the hall had emptied until the music faded. Then came the moment. He stood slightly tipsy from whatever that glowing drink had been and gave a clumsy little bow. Well, I return to the subdeck, where we mortals sleep. She regarded him quietly. Then, without a word, she walked to the door. Touched the panel. The soft click of the lock sounded like thunder. He blinked. She turned slowly, that same unreadable smile on her lips. You complimented me. I did. That is rare among your kind, among all kinds. Well, I meant it. I know. The silence grew again, but this time it didn't feel like doom. It felt like a held breath, a choice not yet made, or maybe made already. I'm not in trouble, am I? He ventured. Only if you fear comfort, she said, and gestured toward the table. Sit with me. I wish to hear more about your earth beverages, particularly the one called Slush Puppy. He grinned, prepared to be amazed and mildly horrified. She sat. He joined her, and somewhere behind that locked door, the stars continued spinning silently by. Eli tried not to panic the next morning when he found a glowing purple fruit sitting on his workstation. It was oblong, pulsing slightly, and emitted a low hum if you looked at it too long. He poked it with a stylus, then cautiously sniffed it. The scent was something between lavender and a dentist's office. A folded note beneath it, written in flawless standard galactic, simply read, "In appreciation for last night's knowledge exchange. Z." Eli stared at it for a long time, then glanced around the empty engineering bay. Is this a thank you fruit or a challenge? He tried to take a bite and the fruit hissed at him. Literally hissed. He dropped it, yelped, and backed away like it had sprouted legs, which honestly wouldn't have surprised him at this point. By the time it stopped vibrating and settled into what he assumed was a digest me when ready pose, he decided to just frame it, probably safer. The crew had started noticing. It began with the usual sideways glances in the corridors and mutated quickly into full-on speculation. You're not seriously telling me she talked to you for 3 hours, Ensign Drex said over lunch. You trip over your own boots sitting down. She likes jokes, Eli said, popping a recycled protein sphere into his mouth. Maybe I'm her exotic comedy pet. Drex frowned. You think she's collecting you? Possibly. I'd make a decent trophy. I don't take up much shelf space, and I come with witty commentary. Later that day, 2 Irith guards showed up outside engineering. Not to arrest him, which was his first and loudest concern, but to hand-deliver a datapad from Zyria. No note, just a list of human idioms she found confusing. One of them was kick the bucket. How do you explain that? He asked himself aloud. Do they have buckets? Do they have metaphors for death that aren't violent footwear interactions? He stayed up half the night annotating every idiom with examples, cartoons, and 3 footnotes per entry, because, against every ounce of common sense, he wanted her to understand. The next morning the datapad came back. Same guards, this time with her notes on Irith idioms. Eli blinked at the first one. To stir the void and sip its echo. Is that cooking? He murmured further down. When the moon's edge has softened, love has chosen its prey. That one made him sit back in his chair and stare at the wall for 5 full minutes. By the end of the week, their datapad exchange had become a ritual. They never spoke of it when they saw each other. Zyria would pass him in the corridor, long ears tilted slightly in what he hoped was greeting, and he'd nod like they weren't trading philosophical metaphors behind the backs of their respective species. Then came the greenhouse incident. He wasn't supposed to be there, but the oxygen levels were acting up and someone needed to recalibrate the root circulators. Eli liked plants. Plants, generally, did not like Eli. They wilted when he complimented them and exploded if he touched the wrong leaf. One fern had once emitted spores that triggered a 3-day hallucination about a talking sandwich that kept asking for a raise. Zyria, of course, was already there when he arrived. She was kneeling beside a tree that looked suspiciously like a bonsai if it had been designed by a dream-addled octopus. Her robe shimmered with soft blue light and her ears twitched slightly when he coughed. "You again," she said without looking up. "Me again," he echoed. "This isn't stalking, I promise. The ship just really likes putting us in the same place at the same time." "Perhaps it is taste," she said and stood. Eli opened his mouth to respond, then remembered her last comment could have meant anything from flirtation to insult to a declaration of feudal war. With her, tone was everything, and tone was complicated. "You're good with plants," he said instead, gesturing to the knot bonsai. "They do not lie," she replied, "nor do they ask foolish questions about whether I have battle armor in a different color." Eli snorted. "I mean, do you?" "Red," she said, "but it stains." He laughed. It echoed weirdly in the greenhouse, making it sound like three of him found her funny. He was fine with that. She walked with him among the foliage, asking more questions, this time about Earth seasons, human weddings, and why so many of their rituals involved cakes. He told her about his cousin's reception, where a malfunctioning drone dropped a 30-kilogram wedding cake on the groom's mother. Zyria looked thoughtful. "Your society encourages violence through dessert. Only when things go really well." At the far end of the greenhouse, under a hanging vine that smelled faintly like hot metal and lemons, she stopped. "I have a question," she said, suddenly more serious. "Okay," he said, suddenly more nervous. "Is it considered unwise among your kind to pursue affection across species?" He blinked. Define affection." She stepped a bit closer. The plants around them didn't move, but he felt like the air shifted. Emotional closeness, trust, curiosity, the desire to understand, or perhaps to share moments, privately. "Well," Eli said, trying not to combust, "humans are pretty good at liking who they like, and the ones who complain usually don't get invited to the fun parties." Her head tilted slightly. "That is not an answer." "It's the closest I can get without legal counsel." She stared at him for a moment longer, then gently reached up and tucked something behind his ear. It was a leaf, a small silver one shaped like a star. "In Erith custom," she said, "this marks someone who has shared breath with another." Wow. "You may remove it if it offends." No offense, I mean. I'm honored, I think." "Good," she said, then turned and walked away without another word. Eli stood there for a while, long enough for the leaf to start vibrating. It seemed to be purring. He eventually made his way back to the subdeck. He didn't remove the leaf. Instead, he left it in place, and when the cleaning drone passed him with an annoyed chirp, he pointed at it and said, "Look, I don't know what this means either, but I think I've been chosen." The drone was unimpressed, but Eli, he was starting to think the universe had plans, and possibly a sense of humor. It started with a perfectly ordinary diplomatic tour and ended with a rock trying to kill them. Eli had only agreed to join because the chief engineer was busy mediating a feud between two vending machines, and someone needed to accompany the Erith delegation's inspection of the Drayle's ruins. Officially, he was there to monitor environmental stability. Unofficially, he was there because Zyria had asked if he liked ancient history, and he'd said yes before realizing he didn't know any. The Drayle's ruins were located on Novia 6 surface, a once-inhabited moon covered in icy plains and forgotten monoliths. They arrived in a shuttle equipped with gravity dampeners, thermal cloaks, and one Erith historian, who insisted on narrating every rock formation like it was his last will and testament. Zyria walked slightly ahead, silent, robes trailing behind her, her long ears subtly twitching whenever Eli tried to sneak a snack. He wasn't sure when they got separated. One moment he was taking a closer look at a peculiar set of crystalline pillars. The next there was a tremor, a brief scream, and then the ground opened up beneath them with all the courtesy of a trapdoor at a magician's funeral. When the dust settled, Eli groaned and opened his eyes to find himself in a cave made of glowing mineral veins and subtle humming walls. He groaned again, not from pain, but because the cave was obviously ancient, definitely important, and very probably filled with things that would either try to scan him or eat his shoes. A few meters away, Zyria stirred, her form partially obscured by a collapsed arch. "Zyria," he called, scrambling to his feet. "I am unharmed," she said, sitting up and brushing off fragments of history, though mildly inconvenienced. "That makes two of us." He looked around. "Well, we're definitely lost in an ancient subterranean ruin, again, if I had a credit for every time this happened." She raised an eyebrow. "Has this happened before?" "No, but I like sounding experienced." They began exploring the chamber, which turned out to be larger than expected. Strange inscriptions lined the walls, spiraling in patterns that looked almost mathematical. At the center of the room, a massive crystalline obelisk pulsed with a rhythm that felt unnervingly like a heartbeat. "Should we touch it?" Eli asked. "No," she said immediately. "Too late," he replied, already reaching out. Before his fingers could make contact, a low rumble shook the chamber. A section of the wall shifted, and then from a dark recess in the stone, something emerged. It was large, vaguely rock-shaped, and moved with the grace of a fridge falling downstairs. Two glowing slits blinked open near what could generously be called a face. It made a sound like a gravel pit clearing its throat. "Okay," Eli whispered. "I vote we don't die today." The creature stepped forward, one heavy limb raised like a hammer made of regret. Zyria moved quickly, pulling a blade from the folds of her robe, because of course she had a sword hidden in her formal wear. "Distraction," she said sharply. "On it," Eli said, grabbing a loose piece of metal and waving it like a dinner bell. "Hey, you overgrown pebble pile, ever heard of moisturizer?" The creature roared. "I take that as a no." Zyria darted forward, blade flashing in the crystalline light. The creature swung. She dodged, graceful as ever, while Eli took cover behind a collapsed statue that looked suspiciously like someone mid-sneeze. The fight didn't last long. Zyria moved like a windstorm, and the creature, for all its weight, was surprisingly easy to trip once Eli figured out how to jam a rod into one of its joints. When it finally collapsed with a groan that sounded like a disappointed volcano, Eli sat down on a glowing rock and tried not to hyperventilate. "Do all your tour end like this?" he asked. Zyria sheathed her blade, unbothered. "Only the successful ones." They wandered deeper into the ruins, partly to find a way out, partly because the exit they fell through had sealed behind them with the same sort of finality as an angry librarian slamming a book. The further they went, the stranger the architecture became. Stairways folded into themselves. Corridors looped back at impossible angles. A floating sphere passed by them once and tried to sell them what Eli assumed was either a history lesson or cursed jewelry. Eventually, they found a chamber lined with what looked like seats, stone, slightly curved, facing a large projection panel that flickered to life as they entered. Images bloomed in the air. The Drayle's people, long-limbed and elegant, building the structures, raising towers, dancing beneath stars. Zyria watched silently, her face unreadable. "They were beautiful," Eli said. "They were mourned," she replied. "By no one." The images shifted, showing a great exodus. Ships rising from the moon's surface, cities emptying, the stars swallowing them whole. "What happened to them?" "No one knows," she said. "That is why we search to learn." Eli watched the last image fade, a Drayle's child staring up at a departing ship, hand raised. "You think they left behind something important?" he asked. "I think," she said softly, "they left behind something forgotten." For a moment, the silence was not heavy but reverent. Then the floor vibrated again. "Please tell me that's the exit opening and not another angry boulder with legs," Eli said. As if summoned by his words, a wall retracted, revealing a spiral path lined with flickering lights. They followed it upward, emerging eventually into a snowy crater where the rescue team was already setting up lights, and frantically arguing with a drone that kept trying to declare them legally deceased. When they boarded the shuttle, cold and dust-covered, Zyria took the seat beside him without asking. He glanced over. "So, do I get a badge for surviving my first ancient alien fight?" "You get another fruit," she said. "This one may bite less. I'll take that risk." She didn't smile. Not exactly, but her ears twitched, and that was starting to mean something. As the shuttle lifted off, Eli leaned back in his seat and sighed. "You know," he said, "I've had worse first dates." "This was not a date," Zyria said calmly. "Not yet," Eli replied. "But it had all the right elements: danger, mystery, a monster, and escape. All we're missing is awkward dancing." "I do not dance." "Oh, I'm very awkward. I can handle both roles." She looked at him, one brow raised, then returned her gaze to the stars outside. But she didn't move away. And that, Eli decided, was better than any medal. Eli had officially been banned from 3 diplomatic lounges and 1 Erith meditation chamber in the span of 2 days. Not through any grand act of sabotage, unless you counted sitting in the sanctified lotus seat while eating crackers, but mostly because his presence had become a topic of interest. And when an Erith delegation starts whispering about a human technician, Command gets nervous. "Are you aware of the optics?" Commander Halden had asked him during a very long, very awkward briefing. "I once fell down a ladder and broke 3 optics modules," Eli had replied. "Is that what you mean?" It was not. Word had gotten out about the tour, about the cave, about the rock beast incident, which someone had exaggerated into. Eli single-handedly seduced a stone guardian into a coma. And above it all, floating like an atmospheric balloon no one could quite pop, was Lady Zyria. She hadn't spoken to him since their return, not directly, not in person, no fruit, no datapads, not even a passive-aggressive mushroom, just absence, magnificent glacial absence. Eli wasn't hurt exactly, but he was definitely not hurt. So he did what any emotionally confused space tech with limited authority and too much free time would do. He built something stupid. To be precise, he modified one of the ship's errant cleaning bots, a squat, grumpy thing named Chuffbot 9, into a makeshift diplomatic envoy. Gave it a voice modulator, some cheap perfume, and a hollow compartment for delivering messages. It smelled like cinnamon and regret, but it beeped in iambic pentameter, close enough. "Go," Eli told it, sealing a note inside. "Deliver this, and don't roll over any dignitaries this time." Chuffbot 9 blinked its optical unit once, bumped into a wall, then trundled off with all the elegance of a falling vending machine. The note was simple, a joke, a question, a stupid little reference to the stir the void idiom she once sent him, followed by, "If I stirred too hard, I'm sorry. Still hoping to sip the echo if that's allowed." 2 hours later, Chuffbot returned with no reply. But Eli's quarters had been rearranged. Not the furniture, just small things. The leaf she'd tucked behind his ear was now floating in a suspension field above his bed. One of the Erith idiom datapads he hadn't seen in a week had been placed on his desk, open to a page he never reached. At the bottom of the screen, a blinking line of text: "Echoes require silence first." He wasn't sure what it meant, but he did know where she'd be. The observation deck was quiet at this hour, lit by distant suns and soft navigation lights. Zyria stood at the far end, alone, watching the warp lane curve across the void like a ribbon drawn through oil. He approached cautiously. "I'm not interrupting a sacred stare, am I?" "You are always interrupting something," she said without turning, "but not anything important. I can leave. Then I would be interrupted by your absence." He exhaled. "You have the kind of sentences that sound romantic and threatening at the same time. It is a skill, like throwing knives while reciting poetry. I trip over my boots when I tie them." She finally turned. Her face was unreadable, but her ears dipped slightly, a gesture he'd come to think of as not unfriendly. "I heard the rumors," she said. "They are quite imaginative. Did you hear the one where I hypnotized the stone beast with my eyebrows?" I started that one. That explains why it had such poetic structure. I added rhythm and a dance number. They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them light but cautious. I didn't mean to cause trouble, Eli said finally. I was just being myself, which granted is often a health hazard. You did not cause trouble, she said. You caused interest and concern and whispers. And do those bother you? They are inconvenient, but not dangerous. What is dangerous, she stepped closer, is how little I care about them. He looked at her startled. Irith are trained to value perception, she said. Honor, containment. To share breath is to declare purpose. Affection is a binding. An echo made permanent. He blinked. Is this the long way of saying you like me? I would not choose you for humor alone, she said, though your idiocy is textured. I'll take that as a glowing review. She studied him, then held out her hand. He stared at it. This isn't some blood oath thing, is it? No, she said, it is the dance. I thought you didn't dance. I lied. They walked together through the nearly empty corridors, Zyria leading, Eli trying not to step on his own feet. Music hummed faintly through the calm grid, a soft instrumental piece from some Earth archive she must have accessed. He recognized it vaguely, a waltz, with violins, way out of his league. But she moved slowly, guiding, not leading, her long fingers curled in his like she was remembering how to be gentle. And he followed, hopeless and eager, rotating through the empty space with awkward grace. This is very undiplomatic, he murmured. It is entirely diplomatic, she corrected. We are negotiating rhythm. Then I hope we sign a treaty before I trip over your feet. Unlikely, my feet are smaller. And yet you move like a swan. She smiled. You move like a startled satellite. I'll take it. When the song ended, they didn't let go immediately. Just stood there, breath soft, the ship humming beneath their boots. Then, without a word, Zyria stepped back. Come, she said. They are meeting tonight to decide whether this ship will remain a neutral ground or become a symbol. A symbol of what? Of connection, she said, or collapse. That's encouraging. I wish you there with me. Eli swallowed. At the meeting. At my side. He paused. Should I wear something formal or just less flammable than usual? I recommend both. He nodded, okay. Do not speak, she added. Oh, definitely okay. And don't sit in the sanctified lotus seat again. It had lumbar support. She walked off, not waiting for another word. But as she turned the corner, she looked back. You still think I look stunning in the dress? She asked. Even when you're plotting galactic alliances, he said. Her smile didn't fade this time. Then she was gone. And Eli, alone in the corridor, quietly checked his shoes for scuffs and wondered if someone somewhere was watching this unfold and wondering how the universe had let it happen. Because he sure was. The council chamber smelled like old diplomacy and fresh anxiety. Eli stood awkwardly at the edge of the circular hall, trying not to look like someone who had snuck in through the air vents. He wasn't sure if he was supposed to be holding anything, so he held his hands. That felt neutral. Zyria stood at the center of the room, robed in white, her long ears alert, her posture impossible to imitate unless one had grown up learning etiquette from a culture that punished slouching with poetic exile. Around her, the gathered delegates buzzed in quiet tones. Irith, Terran, and a few representatives from species Eli had only ever seen in cafeteria lineups. Everyone was here for the decision. Whether the Virlia, the ship that had hosted so many awkward hallway encounters and fruit-based flirtations, would become a shared diplomatic envoy, a permanent symbol of interspecies dialogue, or be disbanded, its cooperation deemed too volatile to risk. Eli hoped nobody remembered that he once flooded Deck 6 trying to fix a broken shower head. Zyria gestured, and silence rippled across the room. Her voice, when she spoke, had that usual calm iron beneath velvet. We stand at the edge of something not yet defined. And yet, is that not always the place from which truth emerges? The unknown, the uncertain, the uncontrollable, these are not enemies. They are invitations. Eli thought about all the things he had recently failed to control: rogue drones, his own nervous system, and one memorable moment where he tried to bow and sneezed at the same time. We speak of unity, she continued, but unity is not forged through likeness. It is forged through tension, through friction, through the terrible, beautiful realization that someone entirely unlike yourself can still matter to you. Someone coughed in the back. Eli couldn't tell if it was emotional or allergic. There will be discomfort, she said, but discomfort does not destroy meaning, it deepens it. Eli looked around. Most of the delegates looked thoughtful. A few looked constipated. One was blinking sideways, which he'd learned was a sign of profound agreement. Then Zyria stepped back and without ceremony looked straight at Eli. He froze. Eli Ward, she said clearly. Approach. Okay, he muttered to himself. No pressure, just galactic history, totally fine. He stepped forward, boots echoing in the chamber, and stopped beside her like he was waiting for someone to tell him he was in the wrong room. This is the human who, against all odds and better judgment, Zyria said, helped me understand the necessity of untranslatable things, of gestures without precedent, of kindness unbound by protocol. Eli raised a hand. Hi. I represent the proud tradition of tripping over important artifacts and saying sorry a lot. A few laughs, real ones. He is not here as an ambassador, she continued, but as a reminder that diplomacy begins not in war rooms but in gardens and hallways and sometimes awkward compliments. I still think the dress was great, Eli said under his breath. A few chuckles turned into open laughter. A Terran admiral, clearly tired of the poetry, stood. Do we have a motion then? Zyria nodded. I propose the Virlia be converted into a permanent neutral envoy vessel, crewed by a rotating alliance of Irith and Terran personnel, with civilian advisors. Seconded, said someone Eli didn't see who. Objections. Silence. Motion passed, the admiral said, a little stunned. Effective immediately. There was a pause, then a gentle hum as the decision locked into the ship's administrative systems. The Virlia had just become something new. Eli turned to Zyria. So, do I get a hat, like a diplomatic hat? You get a room, she said, near mine. He blinked. Just for ease of collaboration, I'm sure. Precisely, she said, and also to reduce hallway incidents. Efficient. Strategic. Their fingers brushed as they turned, leaving the chamber. Neither of them pulled away. Later that night, in her quarters, clean, elegant, very slightly intimidating, she poured a drink he couldn't pronounce and handed him a glass. You were surprisingly coherent, she said. I rehearsed that high for 4 hours. She sipped, I noticed. He looked at the locked door behind them, then at her. Can I ask something? He said. You may. When I first told you you looked stunning, what were you thinking? Right after I said it. She paused, swirling the drink. I thought, how strange that someone with no power can make me feel so visible. He blinked. That's a lot. You asked. Right, okay, follow-up question. Yes. Can we keep doing this? The us thing, even with the hats and the politics and the aliens who blink sideways. She nodded. Yes, but I expect more idioms and better fruit. I'll do my best. She leaned in, and no more leaf jokes. No promises. He stayed late, not for reasons the gossipers would expect, just for the silence, for the sound of her breathing near him, calm and real. In the morning, when he left her quarters, a few diplomats saw him. No one said a word, but someone had drawn a small star-shaped leaf on the panel outside her door. He smiled, didn't erase it. Because for the first time since this whole ridiculous mess had started, Eli Ward didn't feel like an accident on a floating city. He felt chosen. And in a galaxy full of ancient ruins and unreadable codes,